All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob. Yes, there's the Fantastic Four trailer, but like absolute Superman is more important. So, this is the hunt for absolute Superman because remember, he's very different from the Superman that we know and love. He's very difficult to find. He doesn't operate out in the public eye the way Superman traditionally does. And so this picks up with Lois Lane because keep in mind, she's part of Lazarus, this kind of totalitarian military force that oppresses more than it helps. And so as she interviews these people, she's kind of asking them these questions about him, right? She's like, you worked with him at the textile factory. He had dinner with your family. You were friends. Nothing wrong with being friends. He saved your life, lifted the crane off of you all by himself. You're telling me that you don't remember him. And she's like, did he say anything about where he was from? Anything about where he was going? And so as she starts to realize there's not really any ground coming from these people, she switches tactics. She says, look, I think we're getting off on the wrong foot here. You feel like you need to protect him from me, but I'm the one who wants to protect him. He's alone out there. I believe he's very far from home. He can do amazing things. We know that. We've seen it. But he can't really control those powers, can he? Sooner or later, he's going to hurt himself or someone else. He's afraid. He needs help. He wants help. I can help him. And so once this goes on long enough, she realizes that, yes, one part of it is the fact that people want to protect Superman. Another part of it is the fact that they don't necessarily trust Lazarus, but there's a third element of this that Lois doesn't quite realize yet. And when that revelation comes, it's so amazing. And so using another attempt to switch tactics here, she's like, okay, you don't trust Lazarus Corp. I get it, right? They promised you prosperity, but you live in an informal settlement with 400,000 other workers. I'm not asking you to trust Lazarus. I'm asking you to trust me. And I'm fully aware that I have to earn that trust. So forget the other questions I was asking and just tell me one thing. Who gave you that wound? And that's when she's told that it was one of the guys from Lazarus. Now, again, that's the nature of Lazarus itself, right? I mean, technically speaking, they are peacekeepers or peacemakers is really what they're referred to. But despite the name that they're given, they are a very abusive police force, right? And so one of the cool things about Lois Lane, and again, we mentioned in the last video where she's very much kind of universal in terms of how she functions, right? The go get 'em, no nonsense, do whatever it takes to get the story kind of person. Of course, she's not a reporter here, but she still goes to the facts because Lois walks up on this guy and she's like, you're Crenshaw, right? And like this dude is just attacking her. She's like, I hear you like to cut people for fun. And so once she gets the upper hand on him, it's this amazing moment, right? She's just like, which hand's your knifing hand? If you don't show me, I'm going to assume that it's both. And so like he shows her which hand it is. She's like, after this, we're done here, Peacemaker, except for one last thing, right? She breaks this guy's fingers and she's like, you're under arrest. Right? And it's just like, it's amazing. Like it's the most Lois Lane thing that a person could do. But then you get the actual answer from these people that Lois was talking to. And it's just like this incredible revelation about absolute Superman, right? This guy, he says, it changes you. Being in his presence, you feel this now. I can tell. You sleep for many hours, yet still don't want to wake up. Because when you sleep, you can see him, yes? Burned into the darkness behind your eyes. Sometimes when you try very hard, you can even feel the sizzle of his dust in the air. You were struck by lightning, Agent Lane. Now you cannot help but chase the storm. I went looking for him as well, after he saved me and my family at the mine. And the stories continue here, right? After he saved me, I searched for him. Nothing else seemed to make sense. But I couldn't find him. Another person says, I couldn't find him, and neither will you, because he is a whisper who walks among screams. He sees all, children in cages, families clinging to rafts, grown men weeping on the factory floor. As you say, he is afraid, but not afraid of you. The Superman fears the day Lazarus will drive him to such anger he cannot help but save this world by killing all of you. And we pray for this. We pray for such a thing in every language, in every slum across the world. It is why he has come to us. I know. And it's the craziest revelation here because one, for the average person out there, and there's a really cool callback to this, for the average person out there, they view Superman with an almost religious fervor, right? A champion of the people. And they would rather die than betray Superman to Lois Lane and to Lazarus and all the peacemakers that come with it. But more so than that, they pray for the death of them all. And imagine being an organization so oppressive and so corrupt that seemingly in unison, the world prays for your death and destruction. You would probably think somewhere along the line, maybe we're not the good guys, right? I mean, sure, good and evil is a relative thing, right? The British monarchy thought the founding fathers were bad guys. Would you call them bad guys? It's all a matter of relativity. But when the world wants you dead, you're probably the villain in the story. And so it's really, really cool because this is how Superman was back in the 30s, right? When he was first introduced in like 1938, it's how his character was introduced to the world. A champion of the people who would do whatever it took to protect the people. And so at that point, Lois Lane just kind of looks on everything that happens, right? Currently in a town in Pakistan, and she picks up some of this, red Superman dust, the kind of stuff he leaves behind, right, wherever he travels. And she's like, if you can hear me, and I know you probably can, your friends are wrong, right? I'm not chasing the storm. I am the storm, and you cannot hide from me forever. Now, keep in mind, at the end of the last video, or near the end of the last video, one of the things we realized very, very quickly, Lois Lane is enamored with Superman, right? So much so that she's more infatuated with him than anything else. So sure, there is the professional aspect of her job, being a person out there trying to find him, to bring him in, or at least talk to him, get to know him better, that kind of thing. But if given the chance, she would 100% get in between the sheets. So understand, guys, Lois Lane definitely has a thing for him. And at that point, she gets a call from her father. Now, what's really interesting about this depiction between General Lane and his daughter Lois in this conversation that they have is that it's very reminiscent of the conversation they had in Action Comics 832, right? Which was the comic book or the story arc that took place where Lois talked to her father, who was essentially dead following the Imperiex attack. Imperiex was basically like DC's version of Galactus, more or less. But it was a really cool story because it was kind of a chance for them to settle all these issues that they historically had. That he wanted a son and not really a daughter, so he treated her like a son. That he really pushed her initially into military service, or at least wanted her to join the military, that sort of thing. She wanted her to be like a mini version of him. And there was a lot of strain in their relationship. He really didn't believe that Clark Kent, not knowing that Clark was Superman, that he didn't deserve his daughter, that sort of thing. But through it all, and despite how shady a lot of his actions may have been, he only ever really wanted the best for Lois. And so what you get here is something very similar, but it's a far more professional, quote unquote, conversation between the two of them, in the sense that she oftentimes refers to him as general. She doesn't really call him dad. I mean, she does, but at the end of the day, he kind of gives her these words of advice based on his own life experience, right? Where she talks about the nature of Superman. And she's like, he's not an inherently bad guy. And the reality is, I think that we can actually talk to him. I think we can reach to him and that sort of thing. And she's like, I've chased him across 6 continents, stood in every shack that he's ever slept in, talked to anybody who so much as stood downwind of the guy. He's destroyed $1 trillion worth of tanks, but his body count is a standing joke, a big fat zero. He's not a killer, not a soldier. He's just some sort of mumbly little hippie boy. And the response of General Lane here is, that's what they said about Charles Manson once upon a time. Take the peacemakers with you, Agent Lane. And where she tells him, like, you're retired, right? Like, you know that. Like, do you really need me to tell you that? He's like, you don't have to tell me anything, right? And that's where she kind of breaks this professional action or this professional attitude and is like, Dad, I'm sorry, right? And again, there's still respect there between the two of them, even though it's seemingly kind of grudging. And she's like, I can't get into the field with a squad of peacemakers, right? I need these people out here to trust me. Like, I need them to know that I'm not going to oppress them the way that peacemakers do. And her father's response, instead of saying, you know what, you're right, that's a good point. If you're really trying to find Superman, starting with boots on the ground is the way to go. Instead, he's like, no, right? We had an engagement officer in Karak who was always saying stupid crap like that, going on about the importance of community interface, and did not want some armed escort when he was going village to village. The last we saw of him was a video that showed up one day from the Omega Men, a bunch of fellas in it wearing masks, jabbering something about freedom. Couldn't make out much of the particulars over the sound of the bandsaw that was being used to cut him to pieces. After that, the only community interfacing that I gave any concern about whatsoever is 2,000 pounds and it came out of the sky laser guided, right? That's it. So take the peacemakers with you, because if you decide you want to go on this mission, this kind of humanitarian quest to find Superman, you're only going to find yourself cut into pieces by this crazy group of terrorists. Now, here's the thing, right? And here again is what's so interesting about this: good guys and bad guys, right? When it comes to this determination, it always depends on what side you're on. And that's it, right? If you decide to pick sides, then the opposing side are bad guys, regardless of what they stand for, because they don't stand for what you stand for. And that's kind of what Lois is about to learn here. But before we get to that, what you actually end up doing is, for a moment, picking up with the real reality of what goes on with Lazarus, right? That when you think about Lazarus as an organization, sure, it seems to be corrupt and that kind of thing, but we don't really know the ins and outs of it. Instead, you actually end up having this guy, this peacemaker named Smith, who's brought there. And one of the things he says as he's doing his kind of interview, right, with the Brainiac algorithm, is he's saying things like, I almost killed a bunch of innocent people. Right? Like I was so angry. I was so full of rage about what happened with Superman. I picked up my gun and I was pointing it at people and I was going to kill these people. And the response of Brainiac is, yes, you almost killed them. You almost shot them because your gun misfired. And this guy's like, no, I just missed, right? Like my hand was shaking, but I was trying. I was definitely trying to shoot them. He's like, I was trained to maintain peace at all costs. Sometimes I worry that I could really do some awful things in the name of this. And the response of the Brainiac algorithm is, yes, I understand what you're saying. Right? What you're saying is your gun misfired, right? You didn't really mean to shoot people. It was your gun was defective, right? So we'll get you a new one, and you need to go back out into the field. It sweeps it all under the rug. It ignores the reality of the fact that this guy crying in this interview, knowing that he's at his wit's end and he's terrified that he could do something horrible to these people, that he's told, no, get back out there, right? Your job is to keep the peace by any means necessary. Now, the most logical question to ask there is, well, why don't you just quit, right? Why don't you just leave? And to that, I do not have an answer, right? We're not gonna find out in this video why it is they don't just leave the peacemakers. Maybe you can. Maybe if you quit, then they come after you, they kill you for, I don't know, being a traitor, and then that's it. But switching back over to Lois and her encounter with the Omega Men, this is seemingly not the Omega Men that you're the most familiar with if you come from DC Comics, which, full transparency, I don't know a whole lot about those guys outside of the fact that I guess there's some kind of extraterrestrial superhero team that's composed of like different races. If you are really familiar with the Omega Men, teach me down in the comment section, because I didn't have enough time to learn about them before this video, but I don't really know much about them. Instead, the Omega Men as they exist here really are more of like a rebel force, right? And so in this conversation, when Lois shows up here, right, these guys are following her and she literally stops and is like, so who are you, right? After essentially ambushing one of them, which again goes into the prodigious training that Lois has. And this guy's like, it's not what you think. And she's like, I think you're one of the Omega Men and you're here to kill me. And he's like, okay, so it's sort of what you think. And he's like, but I'm not here to kill you. And her response is good because it seems that you're really bad at doing that. So keep your hands where I can see him. And this guy says, I know what you've been told about us, Agent Lane, but Lazarus is built on lies. I mean, you're a smart woman. Haven't you ever wondered if you're really on the right side? And he turns around and blasts her with his mask, right? Which basically blinds her. And he says, you'll be blind for a good couple minutes. Lower the gun, Lane. I just want to talk. And her response is like, if you think that I haven't been trained to fight while blinded, you really don't know anything about Lazarus. You don't know nearly as much as you think. But then as the fight goes on between these two, it gets really interesting because this guy says, I know that you've been with Lazarus for 3 years, ever since your father's accident. You're one of their sharpest young agents, but I bet I know more about your employers than you do. Do you even know who the Lazarus director is and what he's doing to the working poor of this world? And her response, I know not to trust some mass terrorist who butchers in the name of freedom. And this guy's response, you're way too smart to fall for the same old propaganda, Lane. Lazarus is life. I think we both know otherwise. The Omegas fight to save this world. Now, again, it begs this incredible moral question. If you are a person fighting on the side of preserving life, but you are willing to do whatever it takes to save that life, even if it means killing other people, Are you morally different than the person who's looking to control life and will do whatever it takes to keep that control, even if it means killing people? And you can make an argument in saying that, well, I mean, one preserves life, one controls life. But again, life's not that black and white, and it's all a matter of perspective. If you're the person trying to maintain control, those like the Omega men trying to take it away, they're the bad guys, right? Whereas if you're a person who's trying to return control to the people, those trying to hold on to that control, like Lazarus, they're the bad guys. So it's a really phenomenal kind of philosophical quandary that you have here, because Lois says, I'm sure that's what you tell yourself whenever you kill someone who doesn't want to be saved. I can see you well enough to shoot you now. Put the gun down. And the response here, right? This guy doesn't deny anything she says, right? We kill people, sure, is effectively what he's saying here, right? And we save those who don't want to be saved because we know better than them. And we know they do want to be saved, they just don't know it, which again is a great moral quandary. Who are you to decide what's best for the life of somebody else? What allows you to play moral God in that way? And so again, this guy just says, after everything you've seen these last few weeks, the suffering around the world that's been brought by Lazarus, I hoped you'd be ready to accept the truth, but I'm afraid my time's almost up. So I have just one last thing to say to you, Miss Lane. Run. And like immediately all these shots start firing out of nowhere because the Omega men were waiting, right? This guy was given the opportunity to talk Lois down. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to work. Omega Prime goes after Lois herself. Now, at that point, the Brainiac tech kicks in, right? Detecting the gunshots, alerts the Peacemakers. Smith, the guy who was losing his marbles, is part of this team, and he's sent out there into the field, and he's the one leading point here, right? He's the one that's taking the Peacemaker soldiers to where Lois Lane is at. And as the fight kind of goes back and forth between the two of them, one of the things you learn is seemingly Omega Prime is the reason why General Lane doesn't have his legs anymore, right? She's like, I'm an old friend of the family. How's the general these days? A bit shorter than the last time we met, I'd wager. And again, you just kind of go back and forth. But the cool thing about this, right? One, it's about to get really amazing. It's about to get so dark. It gets so cool here in a second. But one of the things that happens here, right? Alpha, the one who was initially talking to Lois, that they seem to have the gun pointed at kind of both of them. Because much like Lois Lane's position within Lazarus, where she's like, Superman's not an inherently bad guy. And if we can just talk to him and understand what's going on, then maybe we can get him to stand down from like killing our people. Alpha's the same way, right? Lois Lane is not just some blindly obedient member of the Peacemakers. If we can just talk to her. And so it seems like among these two opposing sides fighting with high levels of irrationality, you've only got two sane minds that are looking to prevail here. But in the midst of all of this, right, the red dust appears and boom, like that, they're like, Superman's here, right? And that's where Omega is just like, Primus to all Omegas, he's here. We found the Superman. And then at that point, she kind of just starts ingratiating herself, which nobody can respect, right? You can't respect somebody who licks your boots. And so she's like, Superman, the Omega men stand ready to help you in your fight against Lazarus. Please come with us and together. And he's just like, no, and just like sends her flying. He's like, get out of here. Right? Like, I don't have time for that. And then he looks at Lois and he's like, you. And he's like, stop looking for me. And her response is, I just want to talk. And he's like, I have nothing to say to you. And she says, then I'll do the talking. But please just give me a moment of your time. But then the Peacemakers arrive on the scene, led by Smith. And Smith, who is incensed with Superman, right, is just like, it's the Superman, right? All units respond. And he's like, that's right, that's him. Do you remember me, pal? Right? And the response is Superman? No. And then he just freezes everybody. It's amazing. I love absolute Superman, dude. I love this guy because when that happens, he just takes off, right? He's out. And so seemingly he's keeping an eye on Lois, whether he wants to admit it or not. He's eyeballing Lois Lane. And I mean, Lois Lane as a character, she's always been the eye of Superman's fancy, right? So, you know, of course he's going to keep an eye on her. The two are definitely going to fall in love, which is going to be phenomenal. But at that point, she just chastises Smith, right? She's just like, you moron, right? If it hadn't been for you guys, I'd have been able to talk to him. We'd have been able to have a conversation. You guys came in bumbling and screwed everything up. And so as Lois Lane walks away, one of the regular citizens here is just like, somebody get a picture of this, right? And so at that point, you switch back to Alpha and Omega, right? And again, like Alpha's kind of slapped around a little bit and told by Omega, like, this is all your fault, right? Like you had the chance to take the shot at Lois and you didn't. And that's where Alpha's just like, please don't call me that, right? Like, call me Jimmy, because Alpha is Jimmy Olsen in the Absolute Universe. One of the greatest things, dude. I love the way he's just not like some reporter who takes pictures, a photojournalist. Like, he's a part of a rebel force, right? And at that point, just like in the main DC universe, he's totally raptured by the idea of Superman, right? He's just like, dude, this guy is so cool. And so at that point, you switch back over to Smith, who's just like foaming at the ground and almost maniacal. And it's like, Smith, stand down, right? Like, get his gun, get him in restraints. And where he just kind of seems to snap back, he's like, what in the world happened, right? Like, he spit on us. Superman spit us away like we were nothing, and everyone was laughing. But what did I do? That's the last thing I remember. And his commander's just like, not a whole lot, my guy. You just brought a storm down on all our heads, because Smith lost his mind and killed everybody who was here. And of course, it makes perfect sense that he would do this. Why? Because Christopher Smith is the Peacemaker that you all know and love. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Absolute Superman is incredible. I love this story so far. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. We'll be back with normal Fantastic Four stuff, and I will catch you all later. Peace.